Hello, and welcome to this lecture on the enlightened monarchs of the 1700s. The main idea I want you to kind of keep in mind over this lecture when we look at these three people, kind of four people, but three countries, are these enlightened monarchs that really use the Enlightenment to make their country a better place, or did these monarchs use the Enlightenment to, hide their tyrannical rule? We do see in the 1700s monarchs across Europe know of the Enlightenment. They're fearful of the Enlightenment in some cases. So, what do they do with the Enlightenment? Do they try to make their country a better place and listen to the wishes of their people, or do they try to hide their tyrannical natures with, a curtain of enlightenment? So, I'll let you kind of be the judge with that. First off, we have Frederick the Great. Frederick the Great is a member of the Hohenzollern dynasty in Prussia. So, as you may recall, Prussia was, becoming a major player in European affairs after the 30 Years' War, after the Holy Roman Empire begins to kind of become weaker over the years after 1648. Prussia steps up and becomes a major player in European affairs, with the rulers of Prussia, the Hohenzollerns, kind of leading the charge and becoming a dynasty of sorts in that area. Frederick the Great, rules in the 1700s in Prussia, and he lives for a pretty long time, rules for a decently long time as well. He had an interesting kind of childhood growing up. He ruled, his fathers and grandfathers were rulers and monarchs in their own right, ruling over Prussia. As he was growing up, he had relationships with men growing up, teenage boyfriends and things like that. His father eventually found out, and instead of executing Frederick, which almost did happen, he executed his boyfriends in front of him, traumatizing him probably in a great deal. So Frederick the Great, learned from an early age that the power of the monarch is strong, and it takes there's a lot going into this position. So when he became king in his own right, he had a lot to do and a lot to deal with. Again, Prussia, is a major part of Germany today. It doesn't really exist as a German state anymore after World War II. But we do see Prussia became a really dominant force in German affairs. And again, there's no such thing as Germany, but Prussia is a part of what we call Germany today. So just to kind of refresh, you have the Hohenzollern monarchy, you have the Junkers, looks like Junkers here. The Junkers, that's the name for the Russian nobility, the Prussian nobility. And again, they run the government, but they also run the military. And Prussia's military is pretty strong. After France, Russia, and Austria, they're the fourth largest army, and they are by far have the smallest land. They control the smallest amount of land in Europe at this time. So, despite being a small nation, their army is a pretty decent size, and they kind of become pretty famous for the size and power of their military. Again, like I said, the Prussians are very militaristic. They put their Junkers to work in building their military and serving in their government. So they have a well-organized system of government that they're kind of famous for. Frederick the Great takes over as the King of Prussia in 1740. And right around there, he sees an interesting opportunity. We're going to talk about Austria in a little bit. Austria has a succession going on around that time as well. And Frederick sees an opportunity for Prussia to gain lots of land. So he uses his military and the strength of his military apparatus, including the Junkers and the army itself, to invade Austria. They invade Austria and take a portion of Austria called Silesia. A very for a region with a huge population. And when he is successful in this invasion and conquering it, he doubles Prussia's population pretty much overnight. Very quick advance. He participates in European affairs and the partition of Poland, for example, and in the American Revolution. He's active in that. But we're here to figure out Frederick the Great, was he enlightened? What would we think? So let's look and see some of the things that he did. He calls himself the first servant of the state. This is a change in divine right. Again, monarchs were aware of the Enlightenment. They were perhaps fearful of the Enlightenment. So maybe not using divine right that God placed me on your throne to rule over you. Maybe not saying that is maybe in the best interest of monarchs at this time. They established a single code of laws where, this took a power away from the local nobility and local leaders and kind of centralized power under the monarch, and it made laws easier to follow. You don't have to worry about falling into some random law trap here or there if you're in Prussia at this time. He eliminated the use of torture, except for serious crimes such as treason and murder. However, he also did limit the freedom of speech and religion. He did place taxes on Jewish people and disliked Catholics, but overall he did accept other religions. He just didn't, want too much of a diverse religious population occurring or living in his country, which is pretty much standard for the time. Thinking back to King Louis XIV and the Edict of Fontainebleau, which limited Huguenots from living in France, we're going to see similar actions by Frederick the Great in Prussia. We do see censorship as well. He did not like people speaking out against his government, especially Enlightenment philosophers. Even though he did write, I believe, with Voltaire, and he was living alongside, people like Montesquieu, Voltaire, Rousseau. They lived in the same time period. A lot of the monarchs, in fact, were kind of fans of Voltaire in some ways or another. He did not end serfdom. The serfs who were tied to the land still were required to live on the land and still had to have the Junkers living over them. And again, he was a big fan of promoting the Junkers into his government and military. His father more so wanted, a meritocracy to occur where middle class people would kind of get involved with the government, but Frederick the Great went against that. He was also a big potato guy. This might seem insignificant, but when you're trying to increase your country's population and grow more food to feed more troops and more people, you're going to need crops that can grow anywhere. And Frederick the Great did promote the use of potatoes and the growing of potatoes in Prussia. So people were able to grow and harvest potatoes that were more nutritious than what was previously available, thanks to the Columbian Exchange and things like that. So yeah, that's Frederick the Great. Was he enlightened? You can be the judge there with that. All right, next country is Austria / the Holy Roman Empire. Maria Theresa, she ruled from 1740. So like I said, Frederick the Great, if we go back a slide, he took the throne of Prussia in 1740. And then Maria Theresa of the Habsburg family, the Habsburgs, she took the throne in the same year. And she ruled Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. Her son, Joseph II, who was her male heir, rules only Austria from 1780 to 1790. Due to laws about succession and things like that, her male relatives would take the throne in other parts of the empire. But in Austria alone, Joseph II ruled, kind of as a cool monarch a co-monarch until 1780, and then after she dies, he rules on his own. And then she ruled the Holy Roman Empire in her own right. So we do see Maria Theresa, her succession to the throne of Austria and the Holy Roman Empire does begin a war. There was a succession crisis of sorts in Austria. The different Habsburgs were nervous about, letting the next in line be a female and letting that woman gain the throne. So we see kind of the rest of Europe kind of look over at Austria, look over at the Habsburg Empire and see, oh, we have a woman coming to power. This is a good chance for us to maybe take the throne and steal it from the Habsburgs, who have been in power for generations. So that's kind of where we see Frederick the Great start a war with Austria, and he's successful there. Again, Austria is normally a powerhouse in Eastern Europe, so you could argue this is an example of balance of power, in which a weaker, smaller state that has a pretty powerful army, Prussia, saw an opportunity to get some more land that they thought they deserved from the powerful, entrenched Habsburg family. She does lose Silesia. She does have to deal with that. We do see, Austria kind of, and lots of other European countries for that matter, they do kind of follow the model of Louis XIV and build lots of palaces similar to Versailles style across Europe. Vienna is the home to many such palaces and buildings. Russia begins to build some. We see examples across Spain as well. So lots of monarchs across Europe begin to kind of copy the absolutist principles and building style of people like Louis XIV. France. Um, as she kind of rules, she does get a son who eventually comes into power, and then uh, he eventually rules Austria on his own after his mom passes away. So let's look at Joseph II, her son, who rules just in Austria. What does he do? So he rules for about 10 years, 1780 to 1790. He does a variety of things. He abolishes serfdom, which is big. Serfdom is going to remain pretty omnipresent across a lot of Eastern Europe. It's a big institution that the nobles required and needed to get work done. If you're a noble and all of a sudden all your workers are free, that's kind of scary to you, right? So that's a big deal. He also gave hereditary land rights to peasants. So if you're now a freed serf, aka a peasant, you can now maybe own land and pass it down to your kids. He created a penal code, a penal system that ended the death penalty in many cases, and said all people are equal before the eyes of the law. He granted complete religious toleration in Austria, restricting the power of the Catholic Church, and that's kind of interesting. The Habsburgs are pretty much synonymous with the Catholic faith, so to limit the power of the Catholic Church is kind of interesting and unforeseen. He also promoted public education, giving state government money to pay for textbooks and teachers. In 10 years, he issued 6,000 decrees and 11,000 laws. Now, that might sound good. It might sound incredibly enlightened, but let's kind of take a look at it. What happens after he dies around 1790? He's angered a lot of people, but by that point, he's alienated peasants who didn't like all this change too fast, particularly changes around religion and religious toleration. He alienated nobles who didn't like the fact that all these peasants were freed and serfs were freed and allowed to do what they wanted to do. And we also kind of see them dealing with a strong Prussia. So after he died, the leadership of Austria, the nobility, and the Habsburg family kind of get together and they pretty much undo everything that was done under Joseph II. His mother, Maria Theresa, she is sometimes lumped in with these enlightened despots. She didn't do too much. Her son did a lot more to be enlightened. She kind of ruled as an autocrat, as many monarchs did in Europe at this time. But her son did try to make some changes in an enlightened way. However, none of that sticks. So pretty much everything is reversed. Serfdom is reintroduced. Laws are reimposed against the serfs and peasants, and support for toleration or any type of liberal ideas are pretty much turned around. The last monarch, last country we're going to look at today is Russia. So going back to the last time we looked at Russia, we have Peter the Great. Peter the Great westernized, or attempted to begin the process of westernizing in Russia, attempted to begin the process of modernizing Russia, and then we see a series of successors throughout the 1700s. Peter the Great passed away in the 1720s, I believe, somewhere around there. We see a series of successors after Peter the Great in the Romanov dynasty. Getting into the later part of the 1700s, we see one such successor, Peter the Third, gain the throne. And he's a big fan of Germany, loves the parts of Central Europe that we would call Germany today, and is likes to even speak German times here and there. And he decides to take a German wife to increase his love of Germany and his fandom of Germany. And he marries her. She eventually, is kind of very intelligent for her role and position, and she kind of lucked into this position, marrying the Russian monarch. She gets married to her husband Peter the Third, and with just in like 6 months or so, she makes tons of friends and allies at court. She befriends the Russian nobility called the boyars, makes tons of alliances and allegiances with people inside Russia, and eventually we have her husband murdered. It's almost 100% certain that she actually had her husband murdered so that she could take the throne of Russia. She gets enough allies in the military and in the nobility of Russia, again, those are called the boyars, that when she decides she wants power, she has enough allies and friends to kind of stage a coup of sorts. And the coup works. Her husband is imprisoned and killed, and she takes the throne. She also has heirs, any male heirs that could challenge her, imprisoned. So they could not take the throne from her. So her being the only monarch left, she takes the throne of Russia. and she becomes, the Empress of Russia for a decent amount of time until 1796. In her time as monarch, as the Empress of Russia, she was a fan of the philosophers. She knew Voltaire, and she wrote about the Enlightenment. She funded art across Russia and attempted to, make some enlightened possibilities open for the nobility of Russia, including like opening schools and things like that. But she couldn't do too much because doing too much would alienate the nobility, the boyars. She also learns a tough lesson kind of early on in her rule. She wrote the instruction in 1766, writing to the Parliament of Russia, telling them to reform and to kind of follow the Enlightenment. It's kind of just a suggestion that she writes to the Parliament, telling them to follow France, follow the Enlightenment, and maybe work on following ideals that follow the equality of man. Making people equal before the law, eliminating torture, capital punishment, and maybe thinking about someday getting rid of serfdom, which the nobility relied upon for free labor. That's ignored. Of course, how it's going to be ignored at this point in time. No parliament in Europe, no leadership in Europe is really going to look to go that far. But she does suggest it maybe to put up a facade of enlightened sensibilities. We do see her, to keep the nobles in line and on her side. She does give the boyars, the nobility, more power over the serfs. Peter the Great started this back in the day to kind of centralize and control his country. He does give the nobility lots of power over serfs to keep them on his side and not go against him and challenge him for power. Catherine the Great extends that, and she gives the boyars, the nobility, more power over the serfs as well. This causes a backlash, though, and this is maybe a taste of what's to come in Europe in the next couple decades, or arguably the next 150 years or so. When this increased amount of power is given to the boyars over the serfs, this leads to an interesting event called Pugachev's Rebellion. Pugachev was a Cossack, which is a outsider, a peasant outsider that in Russian society that wasn't really close to a major city. They lived outside in the rural areas and usually like rode horses and things like that out in those nomadic areas. But they were technically, peasants or serfs and controlled by the nobility and controlled by the Russian monarchy. Pugachev is one such Cossack who says, what's going on in Russia with the monarchy is wrong. What happened to Peter III is wrong. He was killed incorrectly, and Catherine the Great is a German ruling us, which is true. Catherine was not Russian, she was German. So Pugachev here says, I am actually the rightful heir. I am actually a relative of Peter the Great, Peter III. I'm in that same Romanov line. Therefore, it's my destiny to lead Russia to freedom and free us from these Germans who are now ruling us and to liberate Russia for the Russians. So he kind of sets up a court. He becomes his own quote-unquote czar in the 1770s, and we see him start a massive peasant revolt, getting lots of other peasants and serfs on his side against the Russian monarchy. So this is a big thorn in Catherine's side when you have this gigantic rebellion. It is put down. Pugachev is eventually captured. He's drawn, quartered, meaning he's like kind of, he has ropes tied to both of his arms, both of his legs, and he's kind of pulled in 4 different directions and, pretty much killed at that point, right? You can't really survive that once the horses go in 4 different directions. Kind of a tough way to go. But Catherine eventually does put the revolt down, and after that, after Pugachev's rebellion, she gives the nobles much more power over the serfs. She gives nobles an exemption from taxation, the right to corporally punish serfs, and just enables much more violent acts against the serfs. So we do see Catherine pretty much not follow a vast majority of the Enlightened ideas. She is a fan of the Enlightenment to some sense. She wrote to Voltaire. She liked some of the ideas of it, but when it came to ruling, she just did not really follow it. And if you'll notice up here, she does live until 1796. When the French Revolution broke out in 1789, she was terrified. She calls the French Enlightenment a mistake and says it never should have occurred, and that she begins banning French works into Russia, for example, and just hopes that the Enlightenment will never rise in Russia again, because she saw what happened in France. She did not want herself to be guillotined in a manner similar to France. Looking at her military outside of Pugachev's rebellion, she did successfully expand Russia, as Peter the Great did. She fought wars against the Ottomans and was successful, and took large chunks of land in Eastern Europe as well. One such example was the plight of Poland in this period. We do see Poland kind of get partitioned and divided up between Austria, Prussia, and Russia from the 1770s into the 1790s. So here's parts of Prussia. We see Prussia here and here. Prussia always is kind of displayed as having multiple parts. There's a part of Prussia here, here, and over here, further in Western Europe. Eventually, as Prussia becomes a more dominant power, they're going to take more and more land. But we do see Poland, who was, again, a major player in European affairs up until this point. In the 1770s, they're going to lose some land to, again, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. 1790s, they're going to lose more land. And by 1795, Prussia, Austria, and Russia are going to pretty much take what remains of Poland and divide it up and pretty much claim Poland for their own empires. So Poland is pretty much gone. This is maybe not a great example of the balance of power, because Poland's power is not really balanced or looked at. Poland's pretty much ignored, and we see these different monarchs of Europe kind of just take advantage of Poland and see it not exist for 100+ years. We'll talk more about that later, though. All right, so that's it for this lecture. I'll see you next time.